The topic of this segment is the male reproductive system, and specifically the anatomy and some of the physiology. The male reproductive system in mammals is much less variable than the female reproductive system. There's a little bit of variability, and where there is, I'll point it out, but for the most part, all male mammals have the same basic parts. I have a cartoon drawing here that shows and labels all the parts. I would recommend also looking at your textbook or other sources to get a more realistic anatomical rendering, because this is just kind of a cartoon and it doesn't really look like the way the structures look in living mammals, but it does show you their relative spacing and all of that stuff. So if we start at the gonads, we have the testes, which are the organs that produce the gametes, and in this case they produce sperm. We're bilaterally symmetrical, so there are two testes in each mammal. The singular of the word testes is testis, this. And there are two possible locations for the testes. So we're used to the situation where the testes are scrotal, that is, they're contained in a pouch that's outside of the abdominal cavity. And this is the case with primates and with most of the domestic animals that we're familiar with, cats and dogs and cows and stuff like that. The location of the testes in a scrotum is thought to be associated with the optimal temperature for the development of sperm. Sperm develop best at a temperature that's just a little bit lower than normal body temperature. So by moving the testes outside of the abdominal cavity, it provides a lower temperature area for the sperm to develop. On the other hand, some species don't have a scrotum, they have abdominal testes. So the testes are located inside the abdominal cavity, very much the way that ovaries are located in female mammals. And there are actually quite a few different mammals that have this kind of situation. So the monotremes have abdominal testes, things like sloths and anteaters, elephants, whales and dolphins, some species of rodents. And the reason for the difference between species having scrotal or abdominal testes is not really well known, and it's probable that there are multiple reasons why some mammals retain their testes within the abdominal cavity. For example, in whales and dolphins, it may have something to do with maintaining a streamlined shape in the water. There are also species that show both conditions. So they have a scrotum, but the testes are only there during certain times of the year, that is during the breeding season when they're actively producing sperm. And there are lots of rodents that are characterized like this. So you can see the testes in the scrotum during the breeding season, but when it's not the breeding season, the testes are withdrawn into the abdominal cavity. After the testes are actually tubular. So if you look at the microscopic tissue, they're formed of lots and lots of little tubes, and it's inside these tubes that the sperm develops. When the sperm is mostly fully formed, it exits through a tube that's called the epididymis, and this tube is sort of wrapped or laid across the surface of the testis. So it's bound to the surface of the testis by some connective tissue, but it is a tubular structure, and the sperm spend some time in here, days to weeks, during which they undergo the final stages of maturation. So they may be pretty much fully formed in terms of having a head and a tail for swimming, but they have to go through some biochemical maturation processes to be ready to leave and be able to fertilize an ovum. So they do that here. And when they are mature, they are released from the epididymis and they travel through a continuation of the epididymis, a tubular structure called the vas deferens. And that's also bilaterally symmetrical. So there are two testes, two sets of epididymis, 2 vas deferens, but they join together here to form the urethra. And the urethra connects to the outside through a structure called the penis. So the sperm are traveling from the testis through the epididymis, through the vas deferens, and then finally out through the urethra. And there's only one urethra. The urethra carries other things other than sperm. So it carries sperm, carries urine from the bladder, and it also carries the secretions of several glands that are associated with reproduction. And these are commonly lumped together as accessory glands. They go by a few different names. You may see some different names in your readings. But basically, you have the prostate gland, the vesicular gland, and bulbourethral glands. These glands function to add other secretions to help the sperm survive and or provide nutrition for the sperm so that they can swim. So these secretions are buffers that prevent the pH of the semen, and we use the word semen to refer to all of the contents, so the sperm and all the secretions of the accessory glands. So it's important for the semen to be pH buffered so that the pH doesn't swing wildly and cause the sperm all to die. And that's especially important for after the sperm is deposited in the female's reproductive tract, because the female's reproductive tract is going to be a different pH probably than the male's reproductive tract. So the buffers in the semen help create less of a difference between the male reproductive tract and the female's reproductive tract. They also contain lots of sugars and things that provide nutrition for the metabolic activity of the sperm. And then finally, some of these secretions can harden to form what we call a copulatory plug. So after the male has deposited the semen inside the female's reproductive tract, the very last component to be added is a substance that is like a gel that hardens to form a waxy substance that is actually causes the female's reproductive tract to be blocked. So it creates a plug that forms the shape of the female's reproductive tract, and that prevents the female from being able to mate again. So the function of the plug, one hypothesis obviously is that it prevents further mating by the female and ensures the paternity of the male who left the plug, but it also may play a role in ensuring that the semen keeps going up into the female's reproductive tract, because remember, ovulation happens in the ovary, the ovum is going to be traveling through the fallopian tube, and fertilization usually occurs in the fallopian tube before the ovum gets to the uterus where it will implant. So it's very important that the semen and the sperm keep moving in the right direction to encounter the ovum instead of going outside of the female's reproductive tract. And so the plug may have a primary function of just keeping everything inside the female's reproductive tract. What's interesting is to watch the behavior of females after mating, because the first thing that happens after the male has deposited the sperm in the female's reproductive tract and a copulatory plug has been deposited in there as well, is the female will groom herself and her reproductive tract, and very often she will pull out, grab with her teeth the copulatory plug and pull it out. So it's almost like an evolutionary arms race between the male and the female. The male deposits the plug, the female takes it out almost as soon as it's put in there. Finally, we have a structure located within the penis called the baculum, and that's not present in all mammals, but it's present in a lot of mammals, and that's called the baculum. And just some examples of species that have a baculum. Most primates do, not humans, but most other primates. All carnivores, rodents, bats, and some insectivorous species. But if you look at it, it varies quite a bit from species to species. So there's the baculum from a badger, and you might expect it to be straight in shape, but they tend not to be straight. They tend to be curved or sigmoidal. Sometimes they also have ridges along them. Look at a few other species. There's bear baculum. And let's see, let's look at the raccoon. The raccoon baculum, at the tip of it, has some knobs on it. Let's look at a few other species. Mink baculum has a hook and also has some structures at the other end. Let's see, there's the coyote, has lots of ridges along the side. Yep. Size comparison with an ink pen. I haven't seen that one before. All right, so they're fairly complex in shape, and it turns out that a lot of the species that have a baculum also have induced ovulation. So one of the ideas that's been proposed for why the bacula are so different in their structure has to do with increasing the sensory stimulation to a female. So all these different shapes and ridges and hooks and all the different morphological differences that you see may have to do with ensuring that the female has enough sensory stimulation in her reproductive tract to ovulate so that the male can fertilize the egg that is produced in that ovulation.